Okay, so in this video, we're going to continue discussing getting our development environment configured correctly for creating web applications under ASP.NET MVC using EC2 instances. So here we have our EC2 instance that we've already configured. We've established that we have Internet Information Services running through localhost. We've also established that we can connect to this from the internet using our IP address, a public IP address, or our DNS name that was provided to us. So we know this is all working, so the next step we need to do is go ahead and start setting up Visual Studio. For this course, we're going to be using Visual Studio 2019. As of the writing of this course, that is the latest version. But before we do that, I want to do one additional thing, and that is I want to come up here and I want to download a different browser. So I'm going to download a Chrome browser. Actually, I don't want that one. Let's go back to Chrome. I like to have a couple different browsers just so that it gives us an option to test our applications. It's always a good idea to install or at least try your applications using more than one browser. So obviously Internet Explorer is here. Let's go ahead and download Chrome. That way we can have a second way of viewing our websites. And I also I'm personally a fan of Chrome, so I generally like to have that as an option for me when I'm doing my debugging. So let that go ahead and continue to do the install. Once it's done, here we go. I like to also right click on these and pin them to the taskbar so that it's always down there in the taskbar. Just a little shortcut. You can decide if you want to do that or not. All right, so now that I've got Chrome here, I've got two different browsers that I can use to test the application. All right, so next step is we want to go ahead and install Visual Studio. So if you go up here and you do Visual Studio 2019 download, okay, just pick the one that's there. It's probably the one at the very top. It's probably the most common one. So here you go. This is the downloads page from Microsoft. I see that there's a bunch of different versions out here. There's Visual Studio 2019. That's what we're going to be using. There's also an open source version of Visual Studio Code, and there's also Visual Studio for Mac. But for what we're going to be doing, we're going to kind of primarily use Visual Studio 2019. There's different versions: Community, Professional, and Enterprise. These two are you have to pay for, but Community is free. And for what we're doing, free is fine. We'll just download that one. So we'll go ahead and go do the install. We're going to just kind of go through this and just put your credentials in there. Just I guess they collect information, but we'll go ahead and allow Microsoft to know about us. That's fine. Okay, once we do that, we'll then wait for it to install. So there's the install, it's down there. So let's go ahead and select it. Continue, and let it go down and install what it needs to get started. And once it's done installing, now we have our options here. So Visual Studio Community 2019 is quite a large IDE. You have the ability to create many different types of applications in here, so you can kind of see a lot of options. We're not going to choose all of these. You can if you want, and if you want to play around and do some other things, be my guest. You're free to do so. But it just takes longer to download and takes up additional space that we don't really need to wait for. So we're just going to select the ones that we know we need. Clearly, we're doing ASP.NET MVC web development, so we want that one. We're also going to want to be doing Visual Studio .NET Core across platform. That's what I was looking for. So we definitely want that one. And let's see if we want that one. And it's also good, we're going to be doing a little Hello World here shortly with a desktop application. So those are the three that you need to select. All right, feel free to select some other ones if you prefer. So let's go ahead and do the install on those. And we'll let it do its thing, let it download what it needs to and install the selected packages. Once it is finished installing, go ahead and you can log in. If you sign up or created an account, what this will allow you to do is save your settings. So if you want to sign up, I won't do that for right now, but you can if you prefer. So we'll just select our general theme here. You can pick, if you're doing web development, you can obviously pick that if you want. That'll just kind of configure things for web development. Let's go ahead and let it do its thing here. Okay. So there we go. So we can get started. We can either open a project or create a new project. So here's kind of the start page. But for right now, let's go ahead and close all this down. Let's close the installer down, and I'm just going to go back here to the start menu. And select Visual Studio 2019. I'll right click on it again and pin that one to the taskbar so we can get to it. Okay, so I just want to make sure we get to it. All right, so here we go. So we're going to start with creating a new project just to kind of get started. So again, it doesn't look like much here, but once we go ahead and create a project, then we'll see all of the options that we have. So for right now, since we want to try to kind of see if everything is configured correctly, we're going to create a Hello World application. Generally, a Hello World application is kind of the de facto way that developers get started in a new language. And to this day, I still do that when I'm trying new language. If I'm messing around with Node.js or Python or Java, and I want to make sure everything's configured correctly, the best way is to create a Hello World application. And we'll do that here. So we have a lot of options that we can choose from. I'll point out one additional thing here is you're going to see a few of these that say .NET Core, and you may see some that say .NET Framework. Just remember that for the most part, we're going to be using .NET Framework. Again, this is the older version of Microsoft, and it's the version that is Windows specific. We know that now that .NET is now available as cross-platform, and we'll talk a little bit more about .NET Core later on in the term. But we want to get started using .NET Framework as our starting point. So if you see those, what's the difference between the two? Just think .NET Framework is a Windows-based application, whereas .NET Core is an application that is cross-platform, that can be run on Windows, it can be run on Linux, and so forth. So that's the main difference. So we're going to go ahead and right now we're just going to pick a simple. We're going to pick a simple Windows form application. Actually, we're going to pick a console application. Let's go find that one. So we're going to pick this one, .NET Framework console app. And what that is that's going to be a little application that runs in the command window, which is similar to a terminal window if you're familiar with Linux. So we're going to run this just to get started. When you choose that one, we'll give it a name. We'll call it Hello World. Okay, and we are going to choose a location. One recommendation I have is you obviously can use the default recommendation. Pay attention to where you store things because you want to be able to find them later so you can submit them. If you're working on an assignment, you got to remember where you store things. What I recommend is to not use the standard location. Rather, I would create another location here. And so what I'll do is come up here to this PC, pick the C drive, and create a folder called Projects. And I usually like to put my applications underneath there. You're free to use the one that's there. I'm just pointing out that sometimes you just got to pay attention. The other thing I got to be careful about is the location that you store to. Sometimes some of the applications, if you stored them to a protected folder like Windows, you run into security issues, and I've seen that. And if it happens, we'll talk more about that in a later video. But for right now, we'll just try to remember to use C projects as just a good location. And it's also nice because it's right at the root of the C drive, so it's easy to find. You don't have to keep drilling down to multiple folders to find it. All right, so a solution name, and we're going to choose 4.7.2. So 4.7.2 is the latest version of .NET at the time of this writing of this, or the recording of this video. So we'll just choose that one. and click Create. So here we have it. This is a really simple application to get started. Again, here we've got the full IDE in front of us now. So here's where we can kind of see the full scope of how big this application is. You've got the Solution Explorer, which is where your files will be. You've got options for doing things like if we want to do things where we're using GitLab or GitHub, or we want to use Git repositories, we have access to that. We have also access to servers, so you can see other types of resources and such. There's a toolbox that you have access to, and so again, I encourage you to spend some energy and get to know a little bit about all of the functionality. Not going to take that right now. Again, that's not the purpose of this particular recording. It's really to kind of get us started. So here we have it. This is a little program that's going to run. And again, this is C#, which is the main language for .NET. There's also Visual Basic.NET, VB.NET. There's F#. There's lots of different languages that are available to you. But for the most part, in this course, we're going to focus primarily on C# because that, to me, I think is the most common language that Microsoft.NET applications will be. As most of your demos you're going to see are going to be C#. But again, you're not tied to just that one. You can use whatever language you prefer. Okay. So if you're familiar with other languages like Java or C, this isn't that much different. It's just a different flavor of it. But again, it's very similar in structure and how it works. And I have additional resources on the course website that you can use to get familiar with the syntax. So don't get too bogged down by the syntax if something doesn't look like you'd expect it to, or maybe you have questions about. So we're just going to create a little console app that's going to run in the command window, which is similar to a terminal window. And we're going to just do a system.console.writeLine. Okay. And we're just going to write out the word hello world. Okay. Just to make sure that our application and our environment is working correctly. All right, so that's our full extent of our application, 17 lines of code. All right, so we're going to go ahead now and go up to the debug window, and you can either choose this option, start with that debugging, or what I like to do is hit Control F5. Either way, it doesn't matter. So we're just going to run it. It's going to compile it for us, and if all goes well, we should see a terminal window, or it's called a command window in Windows, but it's the same thing as a terminal window, very similar. And there is our output, and we're good to go. So at this point, we now have a fully functioning environment that will allow us to create web applications. And the later videos, we'll talk about specifically how we develop web applications in this environment.